Hey, welcome back to the channel. Excited to kind of continue our series of videos, my series of videos that will go on for however long, where I just explain questions that maybe you have about Anglicanism. You come from a lower church background. Hey, buddy, what you need? Maybe you come from a lower church background or something like that, just like I did. And when you look at kind of higher church forms of worship, Anglican, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, you have a lot of questions. You're like, okay, I know that those are Christians, but I don't really know why they do what they do. And so today, the question I want to answer is this: why does my pastor dress like a wizard? Like, if you've ever seen like a more traditional church, you know that pastors oftentimes dress in robes. And so rather than coming up there dressed just like a normal dude, or maybe dressed in a suit and tie, like a more conservative Baptist church would do, they wear robes. And then they've got like these little scarf things over them, and they've got this little white collar, and like, what are we doing here? Why is your pastor dressing like a wizard? So the fancy kind of church term for that is vestments. What the pastor is wearing are vestments. Now, why do they look like this? If I can give it to you in the most like 10-second simple term or explanation rather, is it's a development of Roman dress from 2,000 years ago, right? Christianity is born within the Roman Empire. Jesus is crucified by a Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The church develops and grows in the Roman Empire. Eventually, Constantine is the emperor, and he legalizes Christianity and all of those kinds of things. So I say all that to say is Roman dress culture became Christian culture. And as time progressed, eventually certain Roman clothes began to be designated for folks in the church. So a deacon would wear one thing, a pastor or a priest would wear another thing, a bishop would wear another thing. So that's where you kind of have this outgrowth. And so the church adopted Roman dress, then gave certain dress for certain offices, and then maintain that throughout the years. That's as deep as I'm going to go into it today. If you want a better explanation, in the description, I'm going to link a podcast from a podcast called Word and Table, which is so good. And there he kind of dives into the meaning of the vestments a little bit more and into their history. And so I encourage you to check that out. It's very, very good. So that's kind of why they look like that. It's become part of the tradition of the church, and it tells us about who is who. With that being said, you might say, okay, that makes sense for Roman times. I can understand why that happened. It's 2024. What are we doing here? Why are you still dressing like that? Why, what's going on here? What's kind of the purpose? What I'd like to do is kind of break down maybe I guess, theological and also practical way. Because I understand if you're coming from a lower church background, you're like, this seems kind of weird. This is strange, maybe like unnecessarily off-putting. Maybe it drives like a wedge between normal people and, folks who aren't Christians and the church. Like, why are we doing this? I think it does a number of things. First, having vestments is kind of like wearing a uniform. We're very used to those, right? Go look at any kind of baseball team, football team. They have uniforms to identify what they're a part of. Walk into a grocery store. They have uniforms. Now let's kind of take it up a notch. Maybe think about a police officer. They wear a uniform, and that signals a special purpose and even authority in society. A judge has a specific uniform that they wear that conveys who they are and even authority that they have in society. And so one thing that it does is it just identifies for us that person's a priest, or that person's a deacon, or that person's a bishop. They have a particular role here in the church, and I would say they have a particular authority within the church. And I understand if you're kind of coming from a lower church, the idea of a pastor having authority may be a bit uncomfortable, but hey, from any tradition, a pastor has authority, right? The pastor is the one who has the authority to preach the word of God, right? They're the one that's been called, that's been ordained, that's been set apart that's had the education requirements and the study. So they carry a particular authority to stand in front of people. I would bet any pastor from any low church tradition, they have the authority to discipline. So if you got folks who are snakes in the grass, who are stirring up trouble and dissension, they're the ones who have the authority to go and handle it, to maybe produce reconciliation after calling a brother or sister out on their sin, or to have to kick somebody out of the church, right? I'm using really extreme examples here. The Anglican church is not like kicking people out left and right. We're like, that's not my point, right? My point is to say it conveys a certain, like, this is that guy's job. And he has the authority to preach the word of God, to administer things like baptism and the Lord's Supper and absolution. He's the leader of the church. Like, we know who that is. It's an identifier. Right. That's, maybe I kind of went too extreme the other direction. My point saying is they carry some authority to do what they do, and we can visually see that and set them apart. The second thing that it does is, although it's an evolution of Roman dress, we can apply some symbolism and meaning to it now. What I mean is, pastors wear white robes. And for us, it symbolizes a sense of purity and a sense of holiness. When we see a pastor is to be a representative of Christ. A bishop and a deacon, they're representatives of Jesus to the church, right? They're the ones preaching the word of God to the church. They're the ones administering the ordinances or the sacraments or baptism and the Lord's Supper to the church. They're the one leading the church in the direction God's laid out in his word. And so it conveys a sense of holiness, or sacredness, or otherness that we have, which I think is actually very, very important. I think it's very, very needed. And in our world today, we live in a society that is very, very informal, in a society that has lost a sense of the sacred, right? So we're very, very informal in the way that we dress. Right? Go look at videos in like the early 1900s. Everybody's walking around in a suit and tie, and like they look their best to go out. They look their best to go out to see a movie or a play or whatever else. I even think about when commercial airlines first came to be. People talked about how you would dress up to fly on a plane, and now we show up in sweatpants. And I say all that to say we're a very informal society, and this is countercultural. And I think it's good for us. It sets the church apart from the rest of the world in a healthy way. The second thing it does is it conveys a sense of the sacred. We live in kind of the aftermath of atheism, of a world that says there is no God, that doesn't really live by God. Today we're probably more spiritual, but not religious. I think kind of atheism is maybe dying out, but we believe there's something, but we don't really live for something. I say all that to say we're not used to what's sacred. And so I think for a pastor to kind of visually wear something, along with the rest of the church looking the way that it does, it conveys an idea of the sacred, of the holy, of the other. Like, I've just kind of stepped into a different realm that is different from what I'm used to. And so I think that's actually very, very important. And so reflecting on those things, if you come from a lower church background, you might say, Evan, okay, that's great. Like, thank you for that. And that actually makes some sense. But it's still weird. Like, when I look at it, it's just strange. I'm not kidding you. I've had somebody tell me before, they're like, I just can't get over it. It's so goofy. Like, I just couldn't take them seriously. They look so goofy. I'm like, hey, that's fair, I guess. Like, I understand. Like, it's a total culture shock in a sense. And while that may be true, I don't think it's necessarily true for everybody. Like, I really don't. I think people can learn to appreciate it and get past it. And it's like, hey, that's who that is. I think there are some people, probably especially church people, who are like, bro, that's weird. I don't know if I can do anything with it. What I would tell you is a kind of social benefit, since we're talking about the weirdness of it, that it does do, is it takes the attention off the pastor. Yes, it conveys a sense of their role, right? But the whole purpose of a uniform is to be uniform, right? It's to look like everybody else on your team, right? It's to kind of blend in the background. So a football team wears a uniform to identify with a bigger picture, right? A bishop, a priest, a deacon wears a uniform in a sense to kind of die to themselves and represent the church, represent Christ, represent their order. And so it actually kind of takes the attention off of them. Its goal is kind of once you get past the weirdness of it, it's like, whatever. I think the opposite extreme for somewhere that's very, very casual is that a pastor can be tempted to use their clothing to bring attention to themselves. I'm not saying everybody's doing this. I would bet 95% of churches where the pastor dresses casually, they're not trying to do this. Let's just go the extreme route. You go to a mega church and the pastor rolls out in a $2,000 sweater and like a $500 pair of jeans and $400 Jordans. And like immediately you just notice how expensive and how cool and whatever. And now it's about kind of their personal expression and how cool they are and how hip they are rather than the purpose in which they're there. It kind of sparks a thought. Maybe we'll say, hey, the priest's outfit does draw attention. Maybe it does. Just as like the casual outfit draws attention. Maybe it does. But I think the danger of the casual outfit is it can glorify the person talking. Whereas if you do draw attention through robes, at least it's kind of pointing you towards the bishop or the priest or the deacon's purpose or their function in the church. I hope that's fair. I don't mean to say once again that every pastor is glorifying themselves. Like 95, 6, 7, 98% are not doing that. I'm talking about the worst of the worst, right? In the same way, I think there are folks who cannot get over the robes and stuff. And there are folks who walk in and like, hey, it takes a couple Sundays and it's not even an issue anymore. They've moved past it. They've had a couple conversations with the priest there. They know he's a normal guy or whatever. I say all that to say like, vestments are not, as far as I can tell, prescribed in the scriptures. They were in the Old Testament, which I think sets some precedent for using them in the New Testament, but I don't see them prescribed in the New. It's not a deal breaker. I'm not saying your pastor's not a pastor if they don't do this. I'm not saying every church has to start adapting it tomorrow or they're deficient or whatever. But I guess I say all that to say more than just like bare, empty, lame tradition. There's a reason and a function, both theologically, historically, and practically, why our pastors dress the way that they do. So I hope that kind of helps you understand that a bit more. I will provide that podcast link in the description. Might even post another short article from a website called Anglican Compass, which is kind of for Anglican rookies, folks who are new and just looking to ask the simple questions. And I hope that'll be helpful for you. But thanks so much for stopping by the channel. If you have a question, comment it, DM, however you can get in contact with me through YouTube. And I would love to answer it on the channel. But thanks so much for joining. I hope this brought some clarity, and I'll see you in the next video.